What's up everybody, it's Izzo. Welcome to the lab and welcome to DevLog 9. For today's devlog, we're going behind the scenes and looking at what went in to make DevLog 8 possible. Honestly, this devlog is very experimental. I'm looking for a way to not just show the good stuff, but also the road to get there. This is the lab after all, and you know we're trying to show as much as possible. So I guess the real experiment for today is this devlog. Anyways, I hope everyone enjoyed the first day of the Neo colonies as much as I did, and if you haven't checked it out yet, make sure to tune in. I'll link it in the description. So what we're looking at today is, first we're going to be going over the exchanger saving and loading bug. Then we're going to look at updating segment navigation. Next up, we're going to look at reworking the drop bag, and I don't have much footage for this one. I was really fumbling around trying to get it to work correctly. I had a couple of different ideas that I was trying out, but yeah, I still want to share that with you guys. And finally, we're going to get into how I fixed the human nature, aka the zombie entity bug. So let's get to it. Alright, first up on the agenda is looking at what was wrong with the currency exchangers, which we actually encountered and I introduced in DevLog 8, Codename Playthrough. Before I get into the problem, I should explain how exchangers work. They're objects only responsible for trading logic and being able to spawn in a collider that will handle all the robbery logic. That collider is called a hold-up collider and is saved in a different group of items than the exchangers themselves. They handle spawning in the actual robbery object and saving any progress or data in regards to the robbery itself. So basically there's two objects in total responsible for delivering that full exchanger experience. Exchangers are saved as environment objects, while their colliders are saved as NPC objects. So now on to the problems. First off, after the robbery spawned in for exchangers and you tried to save the game, it would get stuck. After some investigation into the problem using our handy debugger, I figured out the problem wasn't with the exchangers themselves, it was actually with the hold-up collider. But as we can see, it shouldn't be getting stuck. Everything is registering to the system just fine. It's got its item ID, and the file keyword is being picked up. Going into the actual events for saving NPCs, we see the problem. It's the fact the wrong file list is processing them. In short, no NPC objects were getting processed. After fixing it, this was the result. I tested it, saving it, and then loading it back in. So saving worked, but now on to problem 2. It didn't load incorrectly. It was simple. I forgot to add saving all values of the hold-up collider to the update files portion of the logic. With that being added in, it was time for the final test. Everything worked, so for a little celebration, here's me wrecking an attempted exchanger robbery. So for segment navigation to work correctly, there's a group of events that manage 3 colliders that when collided with, either go to a different segment or generate a new chunk within the current segment. While the segments are changing, it requires writing to the file. The current segment needs to be saved while the next segment needs to be loaded in, meaning we need to add in saving logic to our segment navigation. Here's the legacy code to segment navigation. It's very similar to the main saving logic. All of the consoles are saved, followed by all values. Remember, this version of saving assumes all objects, except for those consoles, are essentially saved dynamically, like they save themselves. So step 1, I had to go and move some things around, mainly when the segment number is modified. This number is responsible for telling the system which segment to load in from a file. First it was modified at the start of changing segments, now it's modified at the very last step of the logic. Really this part right here, it's really just dependent on whether or not those objects are saving dynamically or whether or not they're not. This ensures all file lists will be saved properly using that new logic. Step 2 is adding in the real modification to the events, changing out the consoles being saved to all lists being processed and saved. The end result looked like this. Right off the bat, we see how much cleaner it is, since we're only toggling flags instead of setting values and a bunch of other stuff that internal logic now takes care of. Since we're saving to files and that's having trouble with stability, it's a good idea to plug this in to the debugger so it dumps whatever is going on. Using the main saving code for a reference, now that interaction between the player and the segment colliders only triggers to start dumping files with that dump started flag, and it signals the session is over with that session end flag. Once the debugger is done, saving is executed and in theory a new segment is generated or navigated to. Let's see how this plays out in practice. As we can see, that's not what we expected. It went back to the title screen like we quit the game. Clearly, not the result we're looking for. The problem was that our system got confused. That dump finish flag is checked in a different event, and if it's on, ending the game is started. The event is actually the one that gets executed and processed all the way. Because of the way that QuickTeam Fusion 2.5 processes events, it runs from the top to bottom. So since segment navigation comes before the end of game logic, the end of game logic is the one that actually gets executed. The way around it is to put in a code that tells the system how we're ending the session. So I added in a string called endcode, and setting it according to each state of segment navigation and the end of game state. Now let's give this one more try. Success! Alright. Alright, next up on the list are the drop bags, basically the container for all items on the player when you die. Like I said, I don't have any footage for this part because it was a jumbled mess, but I mean come on, a jumbled mess and this being the lab, I had to share the experience. So here's the first part of the journey, the legacy code and the problem. As you can see, the drop bag saved all items in the player's possession to a file upon the bag being registered to the saving system. Let me back up and explain how the system used to handle player deaths. First, the player inventory is stored within global values, QuickTeam Fusion 2.5's way of allowing you to access a value from any frame in the application. Now on to how respawning used to work. Step 1, the player runs out of health. When this happens, a handy death sprite is deployed. It still needs to be redone by the way, and a respawn prompt comes up. At this point, nothing else happens until you choose an option. Quitting results in ending the game without saving, so when you load your game back in, you start from the last save point, which at this point is really just the last time you logged in. Choosing respawn causes step 2, spawning the drop bag. Step 3, all of the player's inventory is saved along with the drop bag's location to the drop bag's file. That's what you guys just see. Remember, this assumes all objects save themselves when they are spawned in or generated in. Step 4, all global values concerned with the inventory are set to 0. Step 5, the player respawns at the start of the world. So the problem lies in step 3. Before writing to the file, we need to be able to select or create the file we're writing to, and now there's no way to do that. And without solving the problem, it was impossible to 1, finish the saving and loading rework, and 2, get your items if you died in once you respawned. My first idea to fix it was to change the storage of the player's inventory from global values to an array, and this would honestly solve a lot of problems, and I really started to do it, but then I seen the time it would take. That would take a while to implement, and then even longer to debug. In the end, I had an idea to use a new directory to contain all the files of each drop bag, then use the actual drop bag object as a connection between that file and the items that it contained, and the game itself. So now what happens is, step 1, the player runs out of health, and the drop bag is actually spawned in when the player at the start, when the respawn menu comes up. Step 2 is creating a new file with all global values saved to it. Step 3 is choosing an option, either respawning or quitting the game. Quitting works the same way, which is awesome, and when respawning, the only thing the system has to do at this point is relocate the player and reset the health accordingly. Problem solved. Alright guys, on to the last step of this devlog, and you know we had to save the best for last. Let's just take a look at this footage real quick. And we made it back in time. Oh, see, oh my lord, what is... You guys see that down there? Yeah. That's stressful. That's more stressful. What is wrong with him? So that was the first attempt of me shooting DevLog 8, and yep, everything was going great until the main enemy of the game just broke. So yeah, all of a sudden, at game time, the zombie entity, aka human nature, just stopped being able to see me and obey the laws of physics I put into the game. So I actually did 2 fixes on the human nature entities. The first one I did thinking it would solve the problem, but it didn't. I'll save showing that one for another devlog though. But let me break down how I designed the AI. Every moving AI except for the skeletons have colliders that manage movement. 2 colliders for each axis of movement. The x-axis colliders control whether or not the AI can see you and how to respond. The y-axis colliders basically simulate gravity. When the bottom one isn't touching geometry, the AI sends entities downwards. When the top collider is colliding with geometry, it sends entities upwards. So the problem was with spawning and tagging the colliders. The individual entity is responsible for spawning in its own colliders and then tagging them with the entity's ID. So that way the right entity responds to the right set of colliders. The problem was actually really simple to fix, and I've come across it before too in my super secret project. What I'm showing is the legacy events to human nature spawning in their colliders. And with this setup, there's a flaw. If two entities spawn in at the same time and try to spawn in 2 sets of both colliders, whichever entity started last is the ID that all sets of colliders gets tagged with. Therefore, the problem that hurt the first playthrough was created. The way to fix it? Well, add in a loop and then use the loop to individually grab the entities and have them spawn in their objects. By using that second condition where we compared the ID value to the loop index, which is based on the number of entity objects, we achieve that, and thus DevLog 8 becomes obtainable. Alright everyone, that was a crazy devlog for sure. Thanks for tuning in to the experiment of me catching you up on all the off-camera work I had to do. Honestly, if there wasn't so much to fix, then this just wouldn't be possible. I don't know if there would have been enough content to make it happen. Anyways, thanks for joining me in the lab. Leave a like if you enjoyed today's lab project. Let me know what you think in the comments, and subscribe to join me in the lab for more experiments. Alright guys, have a good one and see you for the next one.